The Roman legion was one of the most formidable military forces in history, and its success wasn't just due to sheer numbers or brute force. The legion stood out because of its structure, discipline, and innovative tactics. To really appreciate how it compares to other ancient armies, we need to break down what made the Roman legion so unique, and then look at how other military forces of the ancient world operated. At the heart of the Roman military was the legionary, the professional Roman soldier. Unlike many other ancient armies, where soldiers were often farmers or peasants called up during times of war, the Roman legion was a standing army. This means its soldiers were full-time, highly trained warriors who lived and breathed military life. A Roman legion typically consisted of around 5,000 soldiers, though this number could fluctuate. These men were divided into centuries, groups of 80 soldiers, and commanded by a centurion, an experienced officer. 10 centuries made up a cohort, and 10 cohorts formed a legion. This organizational structure was one of the reasons the Roman army was so effective. It allowed for flexibility and coordination on the battlefield. But what truly set the Roman legion apart was its emphasis on discipline and training. Roman soldiers trained year-round, learning to fight in formation, use their weapons with precision, and follow orders without question. Their weapons, including the gladius, short sword, and pilum, javelin, were designed for both offense and defense, making Roman soldiers versatile and deadly in battle. Now let's compare the Roman legion to other major armies of the ancient world. Before Rome rose to power, the Greeks, particularly the city-state of Sparta, were known for their military might. Their primary military formation was the phalanx, a dense block of heavily armed infantry called hoplites. The phalanx was incredibly strong in certain situations. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, and spears pointed outward in a bristling wall of sharp points. It was a nearly impenetrable force from the front. However, the phalanx had several key weaknesses. For one, it was not very flexible. Once the formation was set, it was difficult to change direction or respond quickly to new threats. If a phalanx was outflanked or attacked from the side, it became vulnerable. The Roman legion's more fluid structure allowed it to adapt to different battlefield situations, whereas the rigid phalanx could be its own worst enemy in more dynamic combat. Additionally, Greek hoplites were citizen soldiers, meaning they weren't professional fighters like the Roman legionaries. They fought when necessary, but then returned to their farms or other jobs. This meant they didn't have the same level of training or discipline as their Roman counterparts, which gave the Roman army an edge when it came to sustained campaigns and long-term warfare. The Persian Empire, which spanned vast regions from modern-day Turkey to India, fielded one of the largest armies of the ancient world. Among the Persian forces, the most famous were the Immortals, a 10,000 strong elite force known for their skill and loyalty. The name Immortal came from the fact that whenever a soldier was killed, he was immediately replaced, giving the impression that their numbers never dwindled. While the Immortals were an effective elite force, they still had limitations compared to the Roman legion. The Persians relied heavily on large numbers of troops and a mix of different ethnic groups within their army. This meant they had less cohesion than the Roman forces. The legion, by contrast, was more homogeneous, with soldiers sharing common training, tactics, and command structures. This unity gave the Romans an advantage in complex maneuvers and engagements, especially against the Persian forces, which could be less coordinated. Another significant difference was in weaponry and armor. The Immortals were lightly armed compared to the heavily armored Roman soldiers. While this gave the Persians greater mobility, it made them more vulnerable in close combat situations. Roman soldiers, with their heavy shields and armor, could endure sustained hand-to-hand fighting, whereas the lighter Persian troops were better suited for skirmishes and ranged combat. One of Rome's most formidable adversaries was Carthage, a powerful city-state in North Africa. Carthage's most famous general, Hannibal, gave the Romans a run for their money during the Second Punic War. His army was a mix of different forces, including mercenaries from across the Mediterranean, cavalry from North Africa, and even war elephants. Hannibal was a military genius, and his victory at the Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE, is still studied by military strategists today. He used a brilliant tactic of encirclement, where he lured the Roman army into a trap, surrounding them and annihilating a massive portion of their forces. Despite his successes, the Carthaginian army as a whole wasn't as cohesive or disciplined as the Roman legion. It was more of a coalition of different groups, each with its own fighting style and command structure. This lack of unity ultimately made it difficult for Carthage to sustain a prolonged campaign against Rome. The Roman legion, by contrast, was a well-oiled machine. Even in the face of devastating losses, Rome's ability to replenish its legions, maintain discipline, and adapt its tactics allowed it to eventually defeat Hannibal and destroy Carthage. The ancient Egyptian army was another major force in the ancient world. Egypt was a land of great wealth and resources, and its armies were large and well-equipped. Egyptian soldiers were often depicted with spears, bows, and chariots. Chariots, in particular, were a symbol of power and prestige in ancient Egyptian warfare, and they were effective in flat, open terrains like those found near the Nile. However, the Egyptian army was not as innovative or adaptable as the Roman legion. Much of Egypt's military success came from its resources and numbers, rather than tactical or organizational superiority. Egyptian soldiers were generally conscripts, peasants and laborers drafted into service for specific campaigns, much like the early Roman republic's citizen soldiers before the professionalization of the legionary system. The Romans, on the other hand, excelled at adopting and improving upon the tactics and technologies of other cultures. For example, after encountering war elephants in their battles with Carthage, the Romans devised ways to neutralize these fearsome beasts in later encounters. This willingness to adapt and learn from their enemies helped make the Roman legion such an effective fighting force over centuries. Both the Parthians and later the Huns were known for their cavalry, particularly their horse archers. These forces could strike quickly, using their mobility to harass and outmaneuver slower, infantry-based armies like the Roman legion. The Parthians famously defeated a Roman army at the Battle of Carrhae, 53 BCE, using horse archers and heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, who could break through Roman lines. The strength of these cavalry forces lay in their speed and mobility. They could avoid direct confrontation and whittle down an enemy from a distance. However, while the Roman legion struggled in certain battles against these highly mobile forces, it adapted over time. The Romans developed new tactics and even incorporated more cavalry into their own armies to counter these threats. The Roman legion's flexibility and ability to learn from defeats is what set it apart from many other armies. While Parthians and Huns could inflict damage, they lacked the staying power and discipline of the Romans. Rome could lose battles, but it rarely lost wars. In comparing the Roman legion to other ancient armies, what stands out is its combination of discipline, organization, and adaptability. Other armies, like the Greek phalanx or the Persian immortals, had their strengths but often lacked the flexibility and cohesion that the Roman legion possessed. Whether facing the rigid formations of the Greeks, the elite Persian forces, or the fast-moving cavalry of the Parthians, the Romans were able to adapt their tactics, learn from their enemies, and ultimately dominate the ancient world. The Roman legion's impact is still felt today in military theory and practice, with many modern armies drawing inspiration from the organization and discipline of these ancient warriors. While other ancient armies had their moments of brilliance, none left a legacy as enduring as the Roman legion.